Choice. Proud to be back. Can you see my opening slide here?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thanks everyone. As Cassie mentioned, my name is Galen Mook. I'm the Executive Director of Mass Bike. I'm also a local rider, but a little bit about Mass Bike. We do statewide bike advocacy, which means we do the broader picture stuff of funding, legislation, policy work, the bigger picture. A lot of that are trails and bike infrastructure on the roads. So we'll talk a little bit about where to ride around Massachusetts. But my favorite thing to do is work on a very local level with individuals to kind of get over some barriers to riding and to get more folks riding more bikes more often. We kind of have the unofficial mission statement of getting more butts on bikes. So hopefully this presentation is an encouragement tool to get you out exploring. I'm also leaning heavily on adventure cycling. This is kind of a collaborative presentation that we put together a little bit earlier at the beginning of the pandemic. We first launched this around March to kind of encourage people to go on overnights on bike touring. So I've got some experience personally. I've got some national resources to lend to you. And I'm gonna leave a bit of time towards the end because I'm really interested in your questions and even your stories. So if you've been out bike packing, if you've been out bike touring, I want to hear where you've gone. I want to hear about your experiences. What kind of gear did you have? Successful, not successful, challenges and not. And I can't see the chat, unfortunately, as I'm sharing my screen, but I do want you to utilize it. So please feel free. We have the whole Harvard team in the background checking out the chat. So Cassidy, Ben, Sharon, anybody, just feel free to interrupt me at any time. And I'm happy to jump in. And yeah, thanks for recording this as well. Again, I'm proud to be back with Harvard. This is an ongoing series that we have going. So hopefully I'm here for you, but feel free to steer me in the direction with which you want me to go. And there's a million things we can talk about. So don't be shy about putting your own thoughts, questions, and experiences in the chat. Cool. So I'm going to jump in. This is a kind of a broad presentation. It doesn't go too deep, but I'm happy to go deep in the questions. But what is bike touring? Why are we talking about this? So my goal here is to get you started and to get you over some of the initial barriers so that you can start thinking about planning to start getting out by bike. For those of you who have already done bike touring, you'll really realize there's a little bit of learning curve involved. And the best way to do the learning curve and get over the learning curve is to try it. You will try a piece of gear, not like it, and then you'll go buy a different piece of gear. You'll try a bike position, a bike fit, a bike geometry, not really like it, you'll change it. You'll try a route and you'll say, you know, I really don't like hills. So you'll find the route that are the flattest, for example. But the idea of getting out and getting started, that's where this presentation is going to take us. So we're going to try to keep it pretty simple, but just so you know that we could, you know, really talk about riding across the entire country if you're so interested, but I'll try to keep it fairly local to kind of get you out on an overnight, just for a weekend, just to try thinking about bike packing, and here are some tips and tricks. But basically what we're really going to focus on is just the planning aspect. So we want you to, you know, carve out the time in your schedule, carve out where you want to go, do some good route planning, do the good recon and research, and you can always tap into Mass Bike to check in to see what we recommend. Get your gear all ready, and then pump your tires and go. Oops. Why are we talking about this? Well, especially in COVID times, you know, I'm feeling cooped up. I am like totally cooped up. And even though I've got my own little pod and my own little bubble of friends, I'm just like sick of sitting in my, you know, in my little office and doing Zooms all day. I'm sure you are too. So hopefully this is inspiration so that you can go explore the world. I'm not going to get too much into COVID specifics because frankly, it changes day by day. But you know, the real be all end all for that, the COVID conversation, is to follow the state guidelines. Right now, we're kind of peeling back. You shouldn't really go out with people who you aren't already potted with. You should wear face masks and covers if you're out in general public. And even when you're riding, and we can talk a little bit about that if you like, but there's some certain considerations around COVID right now, specifically around facilities. You know, restrooms that you typically rely on, say at the library or town halls, might not be available. You're gonna have to do a little bit of extra planning, especially if you're thinking about not camping, but if you're gonna do hotels, So a little bit more considerations. I didn't really throw too much into the presentation, but I'm happy to give you my general tips and tricks around COVID. But my goal here is to make this as approachable as possible. And the idea of just, try it. It's cheap. You don't really need that fancy gear. Stay close to home to try things out, to see what works and what's not work. And if this is your first bike tour, just keep going, keep trying it. The furthest that I've gone is about a 2-week bike tour. But I haven't done anything so extensive that some of you might have, such as, going across the country or doing the whole Bay Circuit Trail or doing the East Coast Greenway. But there are a lot of places you can explore locally to Boston area. And you might even want to collaborate by using the MBTA to kind of get out and see what is the beauty of Massachusetts. When do you really want to do this? So at this point, time is a flat circle. Who knows what day it is? I like to joke that right now it's like March 239th. But typically weekends are probably the best time to do it. If you're a worker, carve out the time in your schedule, but really consider the weather. So we're in what we call the shoulder seasons right now. October is a little iffy. The spring can be a little bit iffy until you're around May. So definitely keep that into consideration. There are some particular, spotlighted events. So there's a bike travel weekend, which is typically in June, or Bike Your Park Day, which revolves around getting to a national park. So those are some kind of spurring your incentives to get out. But really, I don't really care, whatever works for you, as long as you carved out the time so you can take the time and not feel too stressed when you're out there. And again, this is you out in the world, make sure it fits into your life. Where? So really, you might want to think about just trying an overnight. You might want to think about a state park, something that's pretty local. You might want to think about camping, especially, before the end of, it's kind of a rainy October day right now. So maybe the seasons have passed, but there are a lot of local destinations where you can just get out for a weekend. So this is where I really want to gear you to. You can check out places along the lines of Warm Showers, which is kind of like a couch surfing for bike touring, which is a great way to meet people who are connected to the network, who will support you, who will offer you a place to, have a bed and possibly do some laundry. They might feed you, but there's resources that we can touch on shortly of, just reminding you that you are not alone out there. But one thing to really keep in mind is that when you are deciding where to go, of your destination, of the time of year, of the gear and all that, keep in mind that the distance and the strenuousness and the kind of the outdoor nature of bike travel still needs to be within your abilities. It's good to kind of get out and stretch your boundaries a little bit, but try not to put yourself in a compromising situation. And that's probably one of the best tips of advice to keep in mind, is to still work within your abilities so that you aren't in danger. So how to choose how far to go typically on an average day. A lot of it depends on terrain, road, off-road, and rugged, and the kind of the climb, the feet that you will ascend in a day. For me, I like to go really no more than, say, 65 miles. Maybe I'm stretching it to 70 to 75 if it's a long day, if I'm carrying my own gear. We'll talk about that in a second. I'd also recommend that you kind of go on the shorter end of your expectations, kind of peel back and try not to push yourself every single day. If you do a 75-mile day, you should be prepared to do a 30-mile day or a 40-mile day the following days, just so you're not burning yourself out. In Massachusetts, we have a variety of terrains to ride on. You can do gravel, you can do road, you can do fully off-road, and we'll talk about a few of those shortly. You can also think about what kind of altitude you want to climb. If you're going to be doing a bike tour on the Cape, arguably it's going to be a little bit flatter than if you were going to be doing a bike tour out in the Berkshires or out in central Mass. So one of the things to keep in mind is the altitude that you will climb. Typically on a hard day, I don't try to push more than, say, 4,000 feet of climbing, which might seem like a lot considering that we are at sea level. But keep in mind that, Mountain Greylock out in Western Mass in North Adams and Adams, that's about a 2,600 foot climb. And just to get up there, it'll probably take you about 2 to 3 hours. Take about 10 minutes to ride down it. It'll probably take you 2 to 3 hours to get up it. So keep in mind that the more you climb each day, the slower you'll go, the longer it'll take, and the more you're going to have to kind of replenish, to stop and recoup. This is a rule of thumb. This is by no means gospel here, but just considerations to think about. Will it be flat? Will it be hilly? How much time do you want to spend on the saddle? And how far do you want to go each day? And I'd recommend, every to each his own. I like to pare down a little bit so I'm not stressing myself every single day. What gear to take? This is probably the most varied depending on your needs, but we kind of have like a 4 category process to think about. On the lightest weight that I'd recommend going on bike touring, we call it the credit card camping. You don't really need to carry much. You've done your prep, you've done your planning, you've got your hotel reservations, you've got your phone and your extra charger, you know where you're going, you got your route. All you really need is your emergency tube, your emergency toolkit, and you can head out. If you've got like a windbreaker or a rain jacket, you got a couple extra layers, you're probably going to be okay. But you've got a backup plan. That's the key, that you're not carrying everything that you'll need, because you'll stay in civilization. People will know how to find you. Then you can go all the way out to the fully loaded. This is where I generally do it. I carry my food, I carry my gear, I carry my tent. I got some photos of my setup in a second. But I go out and I say, I'm going to go out for about, let's say 3 to 4 days, and I'm going to carry everything. That means camping fuel. That means rehydrated food. I'm going to need to stop every so often to replenish my water. But if that's all I'm really doing, I can replenish it at a 7-Eleven or a gas station, or maybe I'll have a water pump if I'm going to be out in the woods. You can go that far. For those of you who are hikers, who do any backcountry packing, who go out and do any backpacking out in the wild, it's a similar gear setup. So, taking a trip to REI and seeing what they recommend for folks who are climbing around in the whites, a lot of that translates to what you're going to be carrying on your bike. Even better on a bike is that you can actually carry a little bit more weight on a rolling machine than I would recommend carrying in a backpack. So for those of you who do weekends out in the whites, you probably are already all set up for what you're going to need to go out and do with some bike packing, except all you're really going to need to do is make sure that your bike has the carrying capacity to carry everything. So you can go all the way from credit card to fully loaded, but then, there's some in-betweens. There's the bike packer, which is, here's some kind of just general ideas of what to take, but the idea is to keep it simple. Just keep it simple. And then, to each his own. If you are a rugged camper, you don't really need a tent. Sometimes you can just go out there with a rain tarp. Great for you. Just make sure you check the weather. It really is to each his own. But a couple of key things to think about is to making sure that it's secure on your bike, to make sure that the first time you're packing it up is not the first morning you're going to be setting out. So do a couple test runs to pack it up, maybe see how it feels to ride around, and just check it out. And again, it's very personalized. Where to go? So we'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that are out there, but the reason that I'm using Adventure Cycling's as a model for this presentation is that they are an amazing organization. They're nationwide. They have a lot of US bicycle routes mapped out that are north and south and east and west throughout Massachusetts, throughout this New England region, and throughout the whole country. If you are really going to go across the country, Adventure Cycling is your go-to organization. They're an awesome org. Check them out. Their maps are for free. They also have some wonderful stories and some tips and tricks and some inspiration that's out there. But again, things to keep in mind when you're planning your route, triple check. Use the Google. Check out Adventure Cycling. Check out some local maps. Maybe even get in contact with a local riding club who might be doing similar riding. If you're going to be off-road, check out the mountain biking organizations. If you're going to be on-road, check out Mass Bike. Get in touch and we'll point you in the right direction. Things might have changed since the maps were last updated. So that's definitely a consideration, to do your homework as much as possible on the routing. You're going to definitely want to keep in mind, like I just covered, how far you want to go each day, what type of terrain you're going to be riding on, the type of traffic you're going to want to go on, and the comfort levels there. So if you want to go completely off-road, there are opportunities for you, but you're probably not going to be on pavement the whole time. Or if you're okay on traffic, we have a very intricate road system throughout the whole country. Keep in mind that your comfort level will also depend upon your safety, or your safety might depend on your comfort level. And then lastly, what do you want to see? Where do you want to go? Are you in the mood to go check out some sailboats and some lobster rolls? Do you want to go leaf peeping out in Western Mass? You want to go check out a cranberry bog? There are a lot of places to go check out in Massachusetts. So, for me, that's kind of like, okay, where do I want to go? And then I'll kind of work my way back. But routing is probably the key way to go. A couple of examples of the US bicycle route system. You can see that you really can go all over. There are a couple gaps we're working on. I'll highlight a little bit of what's going on in the Boston area. But just to keep you clued into, there are over 50,000 miles throughout the country on the Adventure Cycling Association map resources. So get out, explore. It is well worth it, and you can do it. And then US Bike Route System, which is generally the on-road system. We actually have one of the first US bicycling routes in the country here in Massachusetts. It's called the Clare Saltonstall. Goes basically along the eastern seaboard, starts up in Newburyport, goes through Boston, and goes down to the Cape and ends in P-Town. It's US Bicycling Route 1, which is cool. But since then, there's a US bike route system that goes mainly on-road throughout the whole country. And then more locally, I've got 2 examples to show you. There's a bunch of examples, and I've got a map to show you towards the end as well. But this is a great example. This is the Bay Circuit Trail. This is kind of a half moon. Imagine a kind of an outer ring to get a parallel route to, if you were in cars, to like Route 128. But this is mostly off-road, a lot of mountain biking, a lot of gravel, some rail trails, some on road. But the idea here is as part of the Appalachian Mountain Club, it's part of a hiking and camping route, which is accessible to biking as well. So we, as Mass Bike, work with the Appalachian Mountain Club to help bolster the Bay Circuit Trail. It's not quite fully complete, and you can see from the map on the left, there are a lot of proposed trails, but it basically starts out in Newburyport on Plum Island, which is awesome. You can get there on the commuter rail, and you can start your trek. I would assume this might take about 2 weeks to do if you have a gravel bike and you're going to be camping the whole time. But the beauty of a route like this is you can integrate it in with the MBTA. So you can ride a leg from Newburyport to, I don't know, say Hamilton Wenham, and then take the train back into Boston, and then boom, you're back home. You can spend the night at home, take the train back out, pick it up around the Gloucester area, and then, basically go explore. Essentially, it's a ring that starts up in Newburyport and ends down in Duxbury. It's not too hilly because we're not quite in the central Mass Blackstone area yet when this route is being built. But there is a lot of off-road, a lot of bushwhacking. You would need to get a mountain bike, probably, or a pretty rugged gravel bike in order to tackle the Bay Circuit Trail. Check out baycircuit.org. Again, it's a collaboration between the Appalachian Mountain Club and the cities and towns. I think there are 14, I want to say, cities and towns that are participating. I might be totally off. There might be like 30. I'm not really sure. I should know this. My apologies. But it's a collaboration of local land trusts. And for those of you who might be from the area, you might say, oh, I know that trail, but I never knew it connected the whole way around. It's something like 230 miles, and it's really awesome. Another great resource is the East Coast Greenway. So East Coast Greenway is envisioned to be an entire off-road route, 3,000 miles worth, that starts in Calais, Maine and ends in Key West, Florida. We've got a lot of bits and pieces of it, which you're probably familiar with, that you have no idea is part of a 3,000 mile biking route. In Boston, the East Coast Greenway picks up picks up at the top of the state at Newburyport. So if you've ever ridden up in Newburyport along the rail trails there, that's part of the East Coast Greenway. For those of you I saw in the chat who've ridden on Topsfield, on the gravel routes behind Topsfield, that's also part of the East Coast Greenway. We called it the Border to Boston Trail. If you've ever ridden along the Northern Strand, which picks up in Lynn, and it's going to take you from Lynn to the casino in Everett, that's part of the East Coast Greenway. The Paul Dudley White pathway system, which is basically both sides of the Charles River and the bridges, is also part of the East Coast Greenway system. And the idea here is we're about 30% complete with what we're looking at in Massachusetts to make it entirely off-road, not dealing with traffic, mostly rail trails. But East Coast Greenway has some beautiful maps for you as well. And all of this, of course, is online. So you can just take out your smartphone, take out your GPS, and plug in the East Coast Greenway route. Also, we have a spur, which I'll talk about in a minute with some awesome photos. My favorite overnights that I've done in this state, and I've done a lot of them, and they're all beautiful, but is the Cape Cod trails. So from P-Town, Provincetown, all the way to Providence, Rhode Island is the spur of the East Coast Greenway. It is an awesome, awesome route. And you can go there from Boston. You can go and take the ferry from Boston to P-Town with your bike. It's like a $10 charge to bring your bike on the ferry. And the ferry is like, arguably, I think it's like $50. So it's not cheap, but something to keep in mind. And then you can ride the East Coast Greenway route, which is also US Bicycle Route 1, which is also a whole bunch of routes. That Cape Cod Rail Trail is part of it. The Canal Trail is part of it. The South Coast Bikeway is part of it. And the idea is that little gray spur that we have there. If you've got yourself a weekend, check out that route. And you can do it without needing a vehicle. You can take the ferry to Provincetown, and then you can bike all the way to Providence, Rhode Island. I would recommend doing it in 3 days. And then you can take a commuter rail back up to Boston. It's an awesome, awesome route. And you can camp along the state parks along the way. And state park camping costs like $10. So it is awesome. I can't say more about how great it is. But I want you to keep in mind that even though these little bits and pieces, which you might be familiar with, you might have biked that 3-mile leg in Worcester in the Blackstone Valley corridor, I want you to understand that there is a huge nationwide advocacy movement to connect this to a whole extended greenway system, which, you know, we're about 30% done on the whole thing, all 3,000 miles. We've maybe got a couple decades left in us. So if you're interested in the advocacy behind it, keep in touch with Mass Bike. This is what we do. When you're planning your route, this is a photo of me riding in New Bedford, by the way, on part of the East Coast Greenway. Awesome, beautiful coast, sailboats, off-road pathways. It is absolutely gorgeous. But again, keep in mind the terrain, the distance, the services along the way, the traffic that you want to deal with, and first and foremost, in my mind, the scenery. And then lastly, keep in mind the route accuracy. So this is Christine. She's actually the director of the East Coast Greenway in the New England area. This is us on our route. We were actually going and routing the East Coast Greenway. We were looking to see which turns we want to include in the map. So arguably, this is us seeing if this paved road stayed paved. Spoiler alert, it didn't. It turned to sand. So we had to walk about 1.5 miles in the sand with all of our gear. Needless to say, this has not made its way on the East Coast Greenway map yet. But you should know that there are these little off-road trails which exist. And you know, when you're on the Cape, for those of you familiar with the Cape, riding on Route 6, not friendly, not safe. Finding a little bit of off-road trails might actually be okay, even if you have to kind of like trudge through 1.5 miles of like sandy terrain to get to the beautiful pathways. But this is something that Mass Bike does as general advocacy, is just to keep these routes updated, because they are being paved, they are being changed every single, like literally almost every single week. There's a new project that's going and creating these trail networks. This one, for instance, is the extension of the Cape Cod Rail Trail. Once it hits Wellfleet, they're adding about a 4-mile paved section, which is in construction, hopefully going to be done before the season next year. It might be extended because of COVID and weather, so stay tuned. But this is a reminder to check your maps and triple check them with the locals to know, say, hey, is that trail done yet? And if it's not, then you should be prepared to trudge through some backcountry stuff. Cool. And then lastly, I'm going to make a pitch for this app called Bike Route Navigator. This is also powered by Adventure Cycling. It does nationwide stuff. We do integrate with this with the East Coast Greenway app. and we're in pretty regular touch. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll show you another awesome tool, which MAPC, the Metro Area Planning Council, has put out there, which is probably the most accurate of the trail maps locally for Massachusetts. But Bike Route Navigator is a great tool for you as well. Okay. We're about halfway through the presentation, and then I will peel back, and I do want to hear your stories and tips and tricks, but just some more resources for you. Bikeovernights.org is worldwide. So this is also bike powered. It's a resource of adventure cycling. We also plug into it as well. This is a great way to connect with people, connect with routes. People can post their gear list. People can post their personal stories. People can post if they're hosting people, which is also awesome. You'll see here, there's a tab that says First Overnight. Check out bikeovernights.org if this is new to you. It's a worldwide resource, and it's kind of a crowdsource. So I'm encouraging you to plug into this, check into it, collaborate with this. If you've got stories to share, maybe you've done parts of the East Coast Greenway or the Bay Circuit, or know a way to get from Boston to Wampatuck. That's a really awesome route that you might want to share. Bike Overnights is a great way to kind of explore what people have already done. And then you can kind of isolate down what you're really looking for. Do you want a multi-day trip? Do you want a one-day trip? Do you want a multi-week trip? There are a ton of resources. And one thing that you'll find about bike packers is that we love to boast about where we've been and share some of the more arduous stories, but we also love to share the tips and the resources. So there is a wealth of resources online, and I'm only scratching the surface of some suggestions for you to check out. But bikeovernights.org is a great one. Cool. All right, let's talk about some of the practicalities of what you're going to look for. So we talked a little bit about the bikes themselves, all the way from credit card camping to carrying everything. But you're going to want to think about what to have. The bike is not just your packing, but it's also how you're going to get places. So you want to make sure your bike is comfortable, that you're willing to spend 5, 6, 7, 8 hours on the saddle sometimes, and that you'll be able to handle it without kind of running into some limitations based off your actual machine to get you there. Got to have the carrying capacity, you got to have the gearing, you got to have a little bit of the on-bike skill handling. It's going to handle differently underweight. So make sure that you're prepped for it, and do the legwork in advance. You'll make yourself that much happier when you're actually out in the wild. You're definitely going to want to carry the emergency kit with you if you're ever going to be leaving a civilized area. You're going to need tubes. You're going to need patch kits. You're going to need pumps. You're going to want to have your tire lever and the hex wrench and the know-how to use that. If you are on a heavily trafficked route, it's better to have the tools and not know how to use them, because I guarantee you, if you're on the side of the road and another cyclist passes you, they'll stop and they'll say, hey, do you need a hand? What can I do to help you out? But if you're out in the woods, if you're out along, a river, like for instance, in this photo here, and you get a flat tire, you kind of might be on your own. You should know how to utilize the tools to the best of your ability. We've done in the past with Cassidy and the crew, we've done a little bit of the bike ABCs. We've done flat tire changing. So the idea of, watching on a webinar is great, but my recommendation for everybody is, if you really want to learn it, go into your garage, go into your basement, tinker around, go take a class, get hands-on in a safe and comfortable environment, know how your bike works, and know how your bike works particular to your bike, so that if you ever need to get out there in the wild, you've got the muscle memory down, you've got the experience down. And the basics, the must-haves are how to change your tire. You're probably, knock on wood, if you bring a flat kit, you're not going to get a flat. But if you forget your flat kit at home, you're probably going to get 2 flats. Just rule of thumb, just be ready when you're out there to at least get yourself a new tube so that you can at least roll yourself and limp yourself home if you ever need to. But that said, you might benefit yourself by just taking a few classes and getting that Bike 101, that Bike 201, Bike Maintenance 101, and Bike Maintenance 201 classes under your belt. It's also just good knowledge and know-how to have. You're going to want to think about how you put it on the bike. So there's a couple of examples in this photo here. There's some frame bags. There are some handlebar bags. The leader in the red has got a burly trailer that they're probably carrying the bulk of the weight. There are panniers, which you can hang off the side of your bags. Your bike will be particular to your needs, which means that your bike should fit your body geometry. And your bike will have certain abilities to have racks on it or not, or have a trailer or not. So I don't want to say too much more besides that your bike is particular, but I recommend heading to a bike shop to seeing what options are out there. And in Cambridge, not to plug any bike shop over any others because they're all wonderful, but I think the go-to for bike touring is probably Cambridge Bicycle by MIT's campus on Mass Ave. They probably have the most gear in stock and some of the most experienced in terms of sales for just like the bags that work. But that said, Crimson Bikes is also awesome. They're Black-owned business right there in Mass Ave, closer to Harvard Square. Bicycle Bell up by Porter Square is also a fantastic resource, and Carice, who runs that, is geared towards cargo, typically towards like the moms and the dads who have the minivan bikes with the carrying kids around. But if you can carry kids, you can carry a tent. So there are a lot of overlap in terms of the daily uses of a bike that can really benefit you with the gear that you're going to carry. Landry's Bicycles out on Comm Ave by Boston University is also a great resource. They have a lot of gear in stock as well. But not to plug one over the other, check out the bike shops. They're probably your best go-to. There's also a local woman out in Somerville. Her company is called Dill Pickle Gear, and Dill Pickle is kind of a nod to pickle juice is a really good recovery nutrient. If you've done a long bike ride, eating pickles is a great way to kind of get your nutrients back up. So Dill Pickle Gear, she does custom bags. So if you have a particular sized frame or a particular need and the typical retail is not suiting the needs of your bike because of geometry, check out Dill Pickle Gear, and Emily will specifically make a custom bag for you. And it's awesome. It's well worth it because getting it custom made for you, you'll keep it for life. It's great. And she does randoneering, which is a whole other presentation. Randoneering is like going out on a 300-mile ride nonstop. It's like 4 days nonstop riding, and she does those. So that's why she makes these bags for that style. The idea is carry everything you need and do it in an efficient way. So a couple of options for you. And I can follow up with Cassie to share all these resources too, so we can email it out. And feel free to chime in with things that have worked for you or not worked for you, and tips and tricks that you've discovered with carrying gear on your own.
Hey, Galen, can I interrupt you for a second? We do have one, while you were talking about bike shops in the area, do you have any recommendations for used bikes in the Boston area? This question came through in the
great
chat.
Question. I get that a lot. Used bikes are a little tricky, but if you're gonna buy a used bike from a shop, there's two major resources I would point you to. There's the Cambridge Antique Market, which is up by East Cambridge. It's kind of by McGrath Highway. They're a shop that actually has used bikes there. Arguably, they're a little bit older. The bikes there are probably a little heavier. They're kind of the step through urban bikes, the commuter bikes, and they might not necessarily be designed for bike touring. And then there's also Quad Bikes, which is a Harvard initiative out by the Radcliffe Quad, which I don't know what their COVID protocols are, but those are my two go-tos for bikes that are local. And then if you could head down to Jamaica Plain, my top pick would be Bikes Not Bombs, which is a nonprofit, and they do a lot of youth education and developing world donations for bicycles. So they have hundreds and hundreds of bikes that have been donated to them. They might have the best selection in terms of touring bikes. But the thing I would recommend mostly about touring bikes is a touring bike is essentially a combination of a road bike and a mountain bike. It's a road bike geometry, which allows you to go longer distances with a better comfort level of your body on the bike, but it's a little bit wider tires and maybe a little bit heavier than a road bike. So the older bike styles like the Raleighs or the Schwinn's made in the 70s that you'll find from a lot of used bikes, might not be appropriate if you're going to want to do like a multiple day trek. That said, for finding a used bike, you can also look on Craigslist. My only concern with Craigslist is that you don't know who you're buying from. So you really should check to make sure that the source is a reputable source. If you're new to biking, try to find somebody who's got some experience with used bikes and have them check out those bikes with you, because you want to make sure that that bike was never in a crash. So you're going to want to look for very particular things like cracks in the frame, or if the fork, which is where the front wheel, that little bar the front wheel attaches to on the frame, if that's bent at all, the bike is shot. It shouldn't be ridden. It's compromised. But it's a really hard thing to source out if you're not familiar with it. So I caution a lot of folks on buying used bikes. And then my other thought on used bikes are, and I'm one who has a bunch of used bikes, so I respect and I use used bikes, so it's fine. Don't get me wrong, as long as you know what you're getting. But if you're looking for something that won't fail you, a used bike also might have a lot of used components. So even though you buy a used bike fairly cheaply, you might have a worn out chain, worn out gears, worn out cogs, a wobbly wheel, other things that need labor and replacement parts, which might actually end up being more costly for the labor and the replacement parts than going and buying an entry level new bike. So I want you to do the due diligence of actually doing the cost benefit analysis. If you buy a bike that's say $200 cheaper because it's used, you might put more than $200 into upgrading it if you're really going to have it be something that you're depending on to get you on a week-long trip. But that said, if you're just going to try something out, if you're just going to go for a quick overnight or a quick weekend, you might be able to get by with something that might not be like top of the line and might not be totally ideal. So my setup right here arguably took me years and years to build up. It took me a lot of money, a lot of dollars to build up. And you might want to start more simple and then work your way up based off your own particular needs. And a used bike is probably fine if you're just going to do like a couple of overnights. If you are going to go out for like a multiple week trip, I would really do the due diligence of like sussing out whether it's worth it to get something used. Because if you buy something new, there's a store that has backing of it. So if anything fails on it, if it breaks, you've got a warranty system behind it. It's made so that if it's a modern bike as opposed to something that's made 40 years ago. It's going to be made for modern componentry, modern gearing, modern racks, modern bags. So just keep that in mind. Not to dissuade you from getting a used bike. And again, the three that I would go to are quad bikes at Harvard, the antique market in East Cambridge, and then my main pick would be Bikes Not Bombs in Jamaica Plain. And then lastly would be Craigslist. But definitely keep in mind that if the componentry needs to be replaced, that is a considerable cost.
Thanks, Galen. And while we are on the topic of bikes, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but another question did come in while you were answering this question. Do you have any recommendations for bikes with small kids, ages 4 and 7? Any bike seat extensions for 2 kids?
Ooh, yeah, great question. That's it. I might say, especially if you're going to do an extended tour, there are some that you could do with a kid, that you could do multi-day trips that are completely off-road, like the C&O Canal out in from Washington D.C. out to Pittsburgh is a complete rail trail that goes across all the way from Washington D.C. to Pittsburgh, which you could do with a trailer-bike. And I've had some good friends who did a trailer-bike, which is basically a bike extension. If the child is able to sit on a seat, maybe even pedal, it attaches to the adult bike. And I had some good friends who actually had the adult bike was riding an electric bike, and that was attached to the tag along. And they did a week on the C&O Canal. And it was a beautiful trip for them because there was zero traffic because you're along the canal the whole way. And because they were on an e-bike, it wasn't actually that hard to pull the kid and some gear. So they had the e-bike with the tag along, and then the other parent was on a normal bike with gear, and they were able to kind of like make that work. And that was an awesome way to do that. You could also do that, say, on the Erie Canal, which is a great like multi-day stretch that you could do, or the East Coast Greenway portions as well, where they're off-road. In terms of trailers, the Burley trailer, like I kind of showed you here, the front guy, which is hard to see because it's the front photo, but that is a type of trailer which can also probably be converted to have a kid. But if the child is more than, say, 60 or 80 pounds, that's a lot of weight to be carrying in a trailer like that. Those trailers can carry up to 100 pounds though, so that might be a way to think about it. But I would say if you've got two parents riding or two adults riding, that one person carries the kid and one person carries the gear, and then you find ways of switching off so that the bike sizing can match both adults if it ever possible. But my one tip there is to think about maybe even having an e-bike as the bike that is an option for carrying the kid, because even though e-bikes still require you to pedal, it's just that added boost. And that is like, honestly, if you're going to do like a 60-mile day, that really might make your life a lot happier to have an electric assist.
Thanks, Galen.
Cool. And there's, a million ways that I could have answered that question too, but I think, a bike shop might help you too in terms of how your particular bike will fit a kid's seat. And we've done some presentations here about family riding. And one of the slides I pull up, which I don't have here, but considerations of, do you want a child seat in the front, a child seat in the rear? Do you want a bucket bike with maybe an electric assist, so that it's kind of like a much more spacious spot for the child? And then the trailer, which can be modified pretty much to any bike with like a little tag on in the back. Just to give you a quick setup here as an idea, my bike here on the right, and this is Christine, who runs the East Coast Greenway. This is on our trip when we were mapping out the East Coast Greenway, by the way. I've got bags in the back. I've got my tent. I've got a frame bag, which sits in the middle of the frame for easily accessible water or Cliff Bars or stuff that I can grab while I'm pedaling. I've got a front rack, which holds my sleeping bag. And I've changed it up over the course of the 2 weeks that we were on this trip and changed my weight. Do I want more weight in the front, more weight in the back? But this is me with my camping gear, my dehydrated food, my tent, my sleeping pad, my sleeping bag, my rain gear, maybe 4 days of riding clothes, 3 days of street clothes, some Crocs, so I don't always have to wear bike shoes. It's a lot. It's a lot. And arguably, you don't need to go this full route. You could just get some Tidy Cats and strap it to your back pannier and like, boom, you're ready to go. This is like the cheap way to make things happen. So you could do the full gear, which arguably each individual bag, because it's lifetime warranty, because it's waterproof, because I destroy bike gear and I am very well, after learning my limitations that I can't not destroy bike gear, I kind of have to go the higher end. It took me years and years to build up this gear, which, arguably if you're just starting out, you might be just fine modifying some Tidy Cats with some hooks, strapping it on and getting ready to roll. Whatever gets you rolling. And again, like my game here is just get out and try it and then, see what works. You're going to modify your ride. And first bike tour you're going to have, you'll be like, oh, that worked. That didn't work. Second bike tour you're going to have, you'll be like, oh, that was great. Oh, but I realized that I'm limited this way. Let me see the options of modifying that. And then, Tidy Cats might work, but then you realize, oh, it's actually a lot of weight that I'm carrying and just the buckets themselves. And then you start to upgrade or you start to transfer around. And then there's a lot of gear share out there. For those of you on Facebook, I'd recommend checking out the BOSS, BOSS, stands for the Boston Biking Outdoors Society or something like that. And then there's, a bunch of Facebook groups, a bunch of internet forums, which are full of people who are happy to share tips and tricks about how they've DIY'd their gear. So don't feel like you've got to reinvent the wheel every single time you're going out. But also just, don't feel like you've got to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. If you've got some Tidy Cats, that might be all you need. Cool. Just a few more slides and then I'll open it up. Some considerations about the equipment though. I mean, the bikes are super important, but you should also make sure that you've got everything that you need. So get the essentials, get your food, Get your water, get your mechanical kit, get your maps, get your phone, get any electronics that are key, medicines and all that. Make sure you've got a way to carry that safely and soundly and waterproof. I recommend highly that whatever you're doing to carry the gear, that it's bright and visible. This dark bag might not look like it's very visible, but it's actually, I wonder if I could see it here. That little patch on the back of my pannier is retroreflective. It pops in the shining of cars. So keep that in mind. Just make sure that you've got everything you need. And I don't want to go through a full gear checklist because it's dependent on every person. But my key here is that if you are going to have an outer layer, a waterproof, a windproof, a bag at the end, make sure that it is something that drivers are apt to see, because you might not realize it and you might be traveling in places where drivers are not familiar with cyclists being on the roads, because you might be in a rural area or it might be a place that doesn't have a lot of cyclists. So keep in mind that you want to be predictable, and one of the best ways to be predictable is to be visible. Make sure you've got the basics, simple basic pack list: clothes, rain gear, sunscreen, toiletries, flashlight, phone. I would say the phone is probably the biggest, just in case you get yourself in a situation, and let folks know what you're up to. Let folks know where you're going to be. Try to find a riding buddy, and then, make sure that you've got all of the essentials. I'd add a helmet to this. I don't know why I left off helmet here. My apologies, but always, always, always make sure that you've got your helmet and that's in good condition. Sleeping, whatever works for you. If you want to be outdoors, if you want to be in a tent, I'd recommend getting a lightweight tent. If you're going to be a bike tourer, you probably can get away with a 3-season tent. Again, going to REI, seeing what the options are. It doesn't need to be fancy. You can go anywhere on a bike. You can pick and choose your destination, but I'd recommend knowing with that destination at least a little bit in advance, so you've done your prep work. But cool thing about a bike is that you can, arguably find a lot of places that are out there, a lot of campsites, warm showers. You might connect with somebody who might lend you their front yard. I found a lot of churches will lend you a yard to camp in if you ask. I've known folks who've checked in cemeteries and camped at cemeteries, which, as long as it's checked in with the groundskeeper, I've had really not a lot of problems with. But, just like if you're going to guerrilla camp out in the woods, same considerations if you're out bike packing, not much difference there. Bringing your food. Food is going to be a particular consideration. I do like to have the rehydrated meals, which are basically like camping food these days, which are great. But be ready to be able to carry your groceries and to carry enough calories that are going to get you through. And if this is a first time for you, you ought to realize that you're probably going to burn through twice as many calories as you're used to in a normal day. In my multiple week-long bike trips, it took me about 2 weeks after the bike trip for my metabolism to recalibrate. And I was just a voracious eater. I would eat, bag after bag of potato chips. I recommend things that are high in fat, high in salt, but again, depends on the person, depends on what type of food you like. But one of my favorite things though is I would always go, I did a bike trip through the Shenandoah in Virginia. I fell in love with Route 11 potato chips. I would add them to every sandwich that I bought. I would get like a turkey sandwich and add a bunch of potato chips to it. I would get a hamburger, add a bunch of potato chips to the sandwich itself. So keep that in mind, is that you're going to be eating a lot more than you're used to. And then now in COVID times, that's an extra particular consideration. Takeout's probably totally fine, but a lot of restaurants are really wary about indoor seating. So that is a extra special consideration to have, that, if you're really going to be going out for long distance outside of civilization, you're going to want to have your food ready and handy, and make sure you're hitting all the tips. We talked about nutrition in a prior webinar, but you're going to want the calories, you're going to want the fats, you're going to want the salts. Definitely get your basic vitamins and nutrients, but it's going to be the fats, the calories, and the salts that will get you through. And then, don't be ashamed about doing some B&Bs. Martha's Vineyard has some lovely bike-friendly bike packing B&Bs. It all depends on how much you want to spend out there. If you want to be, again, the credit card camper or the fully loaded, it really is your preference. You can go cheap, you can go luxury. Keep in mind that your travel is going to be free for the most part. As long as you got the gear, it doesn't cost anything to do a pedal stroke. You're not burning any gas. And you're out there, it's your life. Not going to say what's worth it and not worth it, but typically for me, I used to be a little bit more inclined to be a tidy cats kind of person and try to do everything on the cheap. But there are certain luxuries out there, especially when you've been out for several days in the wild, that when you tap into that luxury, kind of just like lets you settle in and enjoy life a little bit more. You're out there to enjoy it. So a lot of it is just making sure that you budget. But if you are looking for free stuff, warm showers, again, warmshowers.com. It's like the couch surfing of bike touring. But the cool thing about bike enthusiasts is that, not to stereotype, but bike advocates are typically a little bit wealthier. And those who have been able to take weeks and weeks to do bike tours across the country might have that flexibility in their work, who might have a nicer place for you to stay. So I've had plenty of stories that I've heard about where tapping into warm showers in advance might let you really get into some fancy places. Some folks who are really there to help you out because they love biking just as much as you love biking. So just a little tip there is that you're not alone out there. There's a huge community of people who love bike packing. So checking out an org like adventurecycling.org is a great way to kind of tap into the shared resources that bikers love to have. And then lastly, talked a little bit about it before, make sure your helmet's in good condition. Make sure you've got visibility, make sure you've got all the gear, make sure you've done your packing, make sure your bike's in good condition, make sure you know the laws, make sure you know how to ride in traffic, make sure you're secure and safe, especially if you're biking on your own. Make sure that you've told people where you will be and where you're going to be expected so that if anything goes wrong, they can check in on you, and just be smart out there. And lastly, enjoy it, celebrate, you've earned it. After a 60-mile day, having a couple pints of beer, having a double ice cream is totally okay. Don't feel like you've got to peel back just because you're on a bike tour and you want to be healthy out there. I will say that there are a million and one ways to enjoy this world, but doing it from the seat of a bike is the best way that I found to go and explore Massachusetts. So with that, I'll peel back. I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over. I'm happy to stay for as long as you need me to. I realize I'm running up against the hour, so my apologies for going a little longer than I want. But yeah, I'm happy to chime in with your questions, concerns, and stories.
Thanks, Galen. A few questions did come in that I want to address on the chat, and then we can open up the floor to anyone who wants to unmute themselves and ask a question. So 2 questions that are semi-related is, what are your tips to make sure your bike fits your body / prevent repetitive stress injuries from long rides? And do you have any recommended clothing or shoes for those of us who don't have specialty gear?
Cool. Yeah. I'll start with the second question. The second question is the stiffest shoe as possible works as the best fulcrum. So don't ride in sneakers if you can help it. I'm in hiking boots right now because it's raining. These are great for riding because they're stiff. So you get a lot of leverage. It's okay to ride in sneakers. It's just you're not going to be as efficient in pedal stroke, which is why bike shoes are very, very stiff. I don't know if you ever tried to run in bike shoes, but you're going to kill your feet if you try to walk or run in them because there's no flexibility. So keep that in mind. In terms of bike fit, it's certainly particular to the person. Everybody is different. Every bike is different. So I would actually recommend going to a bike fitter and actually getting measurements taken, which arguably is an expense, is a little bit of an investment, but your bike needs to be modified to fit your body. And there are so many micro adjustments, changing out the saddle, changing out the stem of the handlebars, angling the handlebars up and down, getting different widths of handlebars, changing how your shoe, if you do clip in, how your shoe locks in to the pedal, you can change that angle. And because riding is, just to this person's point, hundreds of thousands of the same motion that are very locked into place, you want to make sure that it's fitting for your body. Don't think that if you've got a pain, it's a problem of you. It's really a problem of the bike. And the bike can be modified to fit your body. So getting a bike fit, arguably, in my opinion, is well worth it. It took me years and years to come to that realization. But once I did, I'm very grateful that I did the whole shebang, had a 2-hour bike fit, got the modified pieces, had my bike swapped out in certain parts, and now I'm much more efficient when I ride, and I don't get pains in my shoulders and my elbows and my knees. I'd also recommend definitely having gloves when you're riding. I don't know if I actually have that in the slide, but having gloves that have gel padding really take a lot of the stress when you're riding. And if you're going to be on the saddle riding for 8 hours, 5 hours in a day, you want to make sure you're doing the best that you can to your joints. So having gel padding is excellent. And then bike shorts. For those of you who are comfortable in bike shorts are key, especially if you're going to be riding day after day. The goal is that you should be able to ride 8 hours in the saddle, have a great night, wake up, and be able to do it all over again. And if you can't, I mean, it might be a physicality of building up to it, but if you're sensing pain, then we got to modify the bike. We got to modify the gear so that your body is appropriate for that bike.
Awesome. Thanks, Galen. And one last question before we open it up. When doing overnights, how do you secure your bike so that it doesn't get stolen? Curious if you carry a lock because they are heavy.
I do carry a lock, yeah. I do carry a lock, and I do carry a steel U-lock and a cable, just like I would lock it in Harvard Square. I would lock it out in the woods. I would lock it to a tree. I know it's a little paranoid, but you know, I just want to make sure that I'm not stranded out there if my stuff gets stolen. And it is an added weight, so that's something to keep in mind. I will say though that when you're rolling, you know, a pound here and a pound there doesn't necessarily make or break it. Like if you were carrying a backpack, because you get a lot more rolling momentum, but it is a consideration to keep in mind. And you know, sometimes I will take off all of my panniers and all of my gear and put it in the tent with me, and then lock my bike up so that my stuff isn't out in the wild too, especially if I'm at a shared campsite. I've never had an incident, and I go on maybe 1 or 2 trips a year that are extended trips over the past maybe 6 or 7 years. Different levels of paranoia for different people, and it might a bit depend on where you're actually riding and the type of people that you're around. But yeah, short answer is I do lock up.
Thanks, Galen. Does anyone else have any more questions? I know we're at 1 o'clock now, but feel free to unmute yourself if you have any last tips or tricks that you want to ask Galen, or I guess share any locations you've gone to or routes.
Yeah, I'd be very curious as to where people have gone, and any stories you want to share. And yeah, we can share the slides. That's no problem.
Can I just ask what kind of bike lock you have? Is it one of those really heavy ones?
I do a steel U-lock, which is the mini U-lock. So it is heavier, but not the heaviest. Okay. And then I double it up with a cable lock, which is arguably a little bit lighter for the wheels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And the only routes I've gone on around Boston are kind of in Boston. Otherwise, I go up to Maine, and it's kind of nice. There's a lot of, you know, remote places to ride, but around here I've gone in the city, which sounds kind of crazy, but like down the Charles, and then, you know, now Beacon Street is partly shut down, so, or there's a nice bike trail, kind of. I don't know. Yours look way better, and I can't wait to check them out.
Well, I forgot to bring a slide in here too, that combining your trips with the MBTA is a great way to do it. So you can take the train to a destination and then go explore. So if you really want to like get out of the city quickly and skip some of the stuff that you're already familiar with or don't want to bother with, taking the train to say like Wachusett and then go riding around there by the Quabbin Reservoir is a great way to check out. And then you skip some of that kind of that arguably suburban traffic, which might not be friendly. Or say take the train to Providence and then go ride the East Bay Bike Path. So you can kind of leapfrog with transit is a great way to check things out as well. And I should say that we've advocated successfully so that as of last week, all bikes are allowed on all commuter rail trains at all times. So you can go, doesn't matter about commuter hours anymore because ridership is so low due to COVID. The MBTA is now allowing us to take all bikes on all commuter rail trains, not the subways, there's still limitations for the commuter hours there. But yeah, in prior times, you had to make sure that you were matching it to the commuter rail schedule. If it has a little bike symbol on the commuter rail schedule, you can take your bike. But now all trains have the little bike symbol.
That's great.
Galen, is this effective immediately?
It's effective, yeah, immediately. I think I should take it back. I might be effective November 2nd, but I'm actually pretty sure it's effective immediately for the bike stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then there's the $10 round trip pass on the weekends that the commuter rail does too. So you can go anywhere in the system on a round trip for $10 if you do it over the weekend, which is like awesome. I think they're just really trying to get ridership up, but we have a lot of really cool places outside of Boston to check out in Massachusetts, especially this time of year. I'd avoid Salem, like don't go to Salem right now, but everywhere else, go check out.
That was awesome, Galen. Does anyone else have any last minute things that they want to talk about or ask before we sign off?
Yeah, I'm curious if anybody's got any tips, special DIY tips, or any snags that they've experienced too. If not, that's cool. Just curious. Cool. I will share one of my joys, my bike joys of when I'm camping is around 2 or 3 in the afternoon after I've had an early lunch, I'll stop somewhere pretty and make myself a fresh cup of coffee. And so I bring jet boil, fresh coffee grounds, and a filter, and just taking some time on a mountain pass or on the beach or wherever I'm at. And it's like a supercharge with the caffeine, but it's also a good way to like recenter myself. So I highly recommend having a fresh cup of coffee on the trip if you're a coffee drinker. And it really it's one of those like simple pleasures in life.
That's a great story, Galen. So it doesn't look like anyone else has any more questions or anything. So I just want to say, give a huge thank you for Galen for sharing his tips on bike touring and sharing some fun stories and photos from some of your trips. Thank you for John Pelletier for answering the questions in the chat, and the Commuter Choice team for helping us organize the event. And please don't forget to check out the bike education library that we have on our website to check out any previous recordings. As Galen said, there was a session on nutrition. There are 2 sessions on bike maintenance, one specifically on fixing flats. And as always, you can contact us at commuterchoice@harvard.edu if you have any specific workshops you would like Galen to explore for next semester. We can totally do that. We're taking any inquiries or suggestions right now. So thanks again, and everyone stay safe and have a great rest of the semester.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Go explore, have fun.